Football fans, sports fans in general, love ratings, rankings, power indexes, that sort of thing. At least the ESPN variety gives us some substance, something to go on, rather than just people sitting around debating who should be the best teams in the country and saying, hey, they should be number one, they should be number two. So Brandon Zimmerman, the Buckeye Battle Cry, myself, looking at the ESPN Power Index for college football coming into 2017. So before we get started here, Brandon, we're looking at a series of components that include offensive, defensive, and special teams production over the last 4 years, but it's weighted toward 2016, of course. Returning starters, both offensively and defensively, tenure of the head coach, creating and obviously reflecting the stability in the program, and a lot of weight given to a returning starting quarterback, or if you're able to get a transfer quarterback with experience to come into the program. Ohio State, according to ESPN, with the second best offense, the second best defense, and the number one ranking overall.
Well, preseason rankings are always fun to talk about. They're never anything you should take too seriously. It's always good when the Buckeyes are ranked number one in any poll. I don't care what it is, but as we kind of talked about offline, it seems like FPI puts a lot of stock into returning quarterbacks. You look at the Buckeyes ranked number 2, seeing how they played against Michigan, seeing how they played against Clemson, and then you factor in that they lose Curtis Samuel and Noah Brown. They lose Elfline. You know, like, I don't know if I would put them as the number 2 offense in the nation going into this year. Number 2 off of potential, I would definitely be all about that. JT Barrett has the potential to be freshman Barrett. Michael Weber coming back has the potential to make a giant leap from where he was as a freshman. Offensive line, pretty much returning everyone, 4 of the 5 guys. So there's a lot of potential there, but I don't know if I'd put them as number 2. But if you look at Oklahoma being number 1, you can see they put a lot of stock in quarterbacks coming back, because the Sooners lost all of their guys. You know, they lost Mixon, they lost Westbrook, they lost Pirine. So, you know, they lost a bunch, and to put them as number 1, you know, to me is just kind of as silly as putting the Buckeyes as number 2 as far as offense going into next year. But I mean, the potential is definitely there. I'm not going to complain with the Buckeyes being number 1 in any poll.
Yeah, it's definitely not a perfect system, and there is no such thing, because if you look at returning starters, well, they're not of all equal value.
Yes.
They're superstars, they're impact players, then there are guys that just barely made a starting spot, or maybe you had to choose who the starter was technically, but they only played half the time. So that can be skewed certain ways. Alabama's got the best defense in the country, according to this index, and Ohio State's number 2. And I think we could both agree that that certainly could be fulfilled very easily by the Buckeyes.
Yep. And I mean, the Buckeyes, when you think about it, they lost 3 of their defensive backs, but their defensive line is incredibly strong. It's 10 to 12 guys deep. The linebacking core is going to be great with Chris Worley coming back, and Jerome Baker coming back, and Booker probably moving into the middle linebacker spot. You've got 3 linebackers that have been playing for the past couple years for the Buckeyes. So defensively, I agree with the number 2 ranking a little more than I do with the offensive side of things. It all depends on how some of those highly rated recruits in the defensive backfield who haven't really played too much step up this year. Kendall Sheffield, I think, is going to be a big part of that. He was a 5-star JUCO transfer from Alabama. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets one of those cornerback spots out there. Denzel Ward, who played quite a bit last year, just like on the defensive line, the Buckeyes like to rotate their cornerbacks through. So Denzel Ward played quite a bit last year, even over Lattimore and Conley, who are both going to be high round picks this year in the draft. So I think the potential is there, but just like Alabama in the 1 spot, they lost a lot of highly talented guys on the defense. There's some really high there's some really highly rated people back behind them that'll step in next year. So I think both Bama and the Buckeyes will be fine next year. So I think 1 and 2 for them is pretty good.
And based on the formula, it shouldn't surprise anyone that if you look at the top 10 or 15 in the country, they're only about 2 to 3 to 4 positions away from where they finished the last college football season. So it's a pretty uniform, conservative approach. We know that there's going to be a team fly out of nowhere into the top 10, if not 2 or 3, and vice versa. Some teams are going to plummet. Auburn at number 5 would be the exception, along with somebody else I saw that rose up the rankings that finished pretty low last year. Georgia was only an 8-5 team. They're at number 13, but they've had a great recruiting class and actually top 10 classes the last 5 years. For the Big Ten, you've got Penn State at number 8, Wisconsin's at 10, Michigan's down at 18, obviously, despite Wilton Speight coming back. A lot of starters and senior starters lost off that Michigan team.
Yeah, I believe Michigan lost 14 starters at least last year, because I think they have 14 going to the combine. So I think Michigan's going to be better than 18 next year. But looking at who all they've lost, I mean, pretty much that whole defense was just taken out by the draft this year. Wilton Spate's going to keep them in games. So Michigan's one to watch there, and then you never know who's going to pop up like Penn State did last year. I don't think anyone would have predicted that Penn State would have won the Big Ten East and then went into the Rose Bowl and been playing as good as they were. So who knows who's going to pop out of the Big Ten and beat the Penn State? Is it going to be like a Michigan State who kind of had their rough year? Are they going to bounce back, or is a team like Northwestern going to pop up, and actually finish out a season? Because it seems like the Wildcats always start off pretty strong, and then once they get to the heart of the Big Ten, they kind of drop off. So never underestimate Fitzgerald. So a team like Northwestern may be the one that kind of pops up this year.
All right. It's the ESPN Football Power Index, which rates Ohio State at number 1, Alabama 2, Oklahoma 3, Florida State 4, and Auburn your top 5 for 2017, not taking into consideration schedule or how the team's going to play against its schedule. So a team could be, let's say, number 5, but ESPN believes they're the 5th best team in the country, but they've got such a difficult schedule that they think that they'll finish 15th or 20th, something like that. So it's just who's coming back, how good's the coach, returning quarterback, and so forth, and how offensive and defensive production has played out over the past couple seasons. But the Buckeyes are at number 1. The trick now is to go on the field and win all the games and finish out the season number 1.
Looking forward to that Sooners game week 2. So that'll be a big one.
That's going to be a big determinant in how this thing plays out, especially with both teams projected to be in the top 5, regardless of what ESPN says. But I think most college football fans will have them as preseason top 5 teams, no doubt about it. Brandon Zimmerman from the Buckeye Battle Cry, breaking down Ohio State's FPI heading into 2017. Thanks a lot, Brandon.
All right. Thank you, Mark.